Have you ever wondered why some furniture just keeps looking so good and looking so good for so long? Today we're going to be talking about wood finishing, which is the process that allows your furniture to look good for a very long time. So the process of furnishing is just the process of refining it, staining it, and protecting the wood surface from environmental agents like moisture, like heat, like the sunlight, to just make your furniture not peel off, not to crack, not to just look old. So we finish the product, we finish the furniture just so that it can stay looking good for long. The person who does this is called a wood finisher. Sio fundi, a wood finisher. So once a piece of furniture has been finished in the joinery process, so rather the joining has been done and the frame of the furniture is intact and standing, it goes now to the sanding, or rather to the finishing department. And the first thing that they do is to sand it down. Can be a very tedious process. It can be a very dusty process. I like to say that it contributes to 80% of the dust in my workshop, because it really it just has to be super refined. So we use different kinds of sandpaper grids. We start with P60, we go to P80, P120, P160, 240, 280, all the way to 1,000. There's about like 4 other there. Like 400, there's P500, P600, P800 to P1000. So P1000 is the most finest grit of sandpaper, although we have even higher ones. But this is where we stop the sanding, the first sanding process, just so that we can now move on to the next step, which is the filling process. So the filling process is where we use wood filler to fill in any nail gaps, to fill in any joint gaps, to fill in any cracks, just so that then you don't see them in the finished product. So after filling has been done, you have to wait for the filler to dry. That can take maybe 2 hours, 3 hours. We love it when it's sunny when in the finishing department, because then it makes the process take a little bit less time. After the filling, we now move again to sanding. And again, we use as many different grits as possible, just so that we can get a very smooth, fine surface. After the surface has been smoothened and it has been sanded, that's why we make a decision on whether the client wanted the piece of wood to be stained, to either go to look like walnut, to look like mahogany, to look like an oak, like light oak, dark oak. So depending on what the client wants the finished product to look like, then we move to staining. If the client wants just the natural raw wood and how it looks like, then from there we will just move on to varnishing. But in this stage, I'm going to assume that we are going to be staining it. So after we have sanded down the filled points, and now everything looks all smooth, we apply the first coat of stain. Now, after we have applied the first coat of stain, it takes about like maybe 2 or 3 hours for it to dry, depending on the weather. And then after that, we go back to sealing and the sanding again. So the reason why we constantly keep sanding is because once you mix the stain is mostly mixed with water. There's a water-based stain, and then there's a one that is oil-based stain. So we use the water-based stain because it dries faster. So once you mix the stain with the water and you apply it on the furniture, there's reaction of the wood. And what happens is that the grains are usually raised. So if the grains are raised, that means your piece of furniture is no longer smooth as it was when you were starting the staining process. So you have to sand it again. So there's a lot of sanding, sealing and staining that happens before you achieve the desired stain of the furniture that you want it to be. So after we have stained, we seal, and the sealing is where we use sanding sealer. And the reason why we are sealing is because, again, with staining, there's a lot of grains that have been raised, a lot of holes that have been opened. So you seal the furniture so that then you can protect this furniture and you can seal every hole, no matter how small, sometimes completely invisible, but it's there. So you seal it just so that you can protect the furniture. And then you do the second coat of staining. Then you sand again, you seal again. You can repeat that process up to maybe 4 times, 5 times, depending on how dark the stain needs to be, or what's the desired outcome of the stain of the furniture. After you have done all the staining and the sealing and the sanding. At the end of the process, after you have now achieved the desired stain or the desired shade of the wood that you wanted it to come to, you apply what we call the clear matte or the clear gloss, depending on whether the client wants the furniture to be shiny or whether the client wants it to be matte. Most of our furniture we use matte because that's just the thing that is trendy now, as opposed to gloss. But when a client requests for gloss finish, then we will apply what we call clear gloss. After that, we will smoothen it with the most smoothest grit of sandpaper. And then lastly, we will oil it or we will wax it. So we usually use linseed oil, which protects the wood. Again, so you apply a generous coat of linseed oil, you leave it to soak into the wood for about like maybe 30 minutes, 1 hour. And then you take the finest grit of sandpaper and you sandpaper the surface that has the oil, and then you wipe it down. And that basically just finishes the finishing process. This can take anything between 2 days to 7 days, depending on, of course, how dark the stain needs to be. It depends with just how smooth the product was, or rather the piece was when it comes from joinery. If it had many gaps, means that you're taking a longer time to fill it, to fill the gaps, to fill the nail holes. Of course, if the weather is good and if it's warm weather, it will take a shorter period of time. So there's a lot of variables that just determine how long this process will take. But this is just the process and makes your furniture. It's one of the most important. I think all the processes are really important, but it's one of the processes, or rather the phases of production, that makes your furniture look the way you imagined it. If you see your furniture piece in the joinery section, you might not understand what's happening there because you're like, is that really what I ordered? But once it's been finished, you're like, yeah, that's exactly what I ordered. So finishing is a really important part of furniture manufacturing.